been fantastic, hasn't it? This has just been very high energy, and it's been great. I'm Jim Cash, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to meet me before. I won't say pleasure. My wife would demean me for saying that. Look, we've got a very exciting opportunity to hear from three outstanding graduates of the school and leaders who are going to share their life lessons with us. I want to just warn you ahead of time that there is a session scheduled for 4 o'clock in here. So when we finish our panel, which will be promptly at 3:45, I know you'd love to connect and talk to some of our panelists, but we're going to ask you to move out very quickly and do it in the hallway outside. I don't want to circumvent those discussions, but we'll need to clear this area out pretty quickly. I'll remind you again at the end of the session. Okay, look, I'm not going to spend any time introducing these people. They need no introduction whatsoever. And more importantly, in your program book, you have a full bio for Donna, Karen, and Ann that I have the pleasure of actually knowing separate from this event. I won't spend time talking about how I know them, but in each case, just outstanding graduates of the school and examples of what the school loves to try and do in the lives of professionals. What we're going to do is have each panelist spend a few minutes talking a little bit about their background, some of their life challenges, and so forth. And as quickly as possible, we're going to move to getting questions from you. This session is to hopefully help inspire and provide insight to you as based on the experiences of our panelists. And again, because we're in a smaller session, we hope to make this much more interactive than we can our plenary sessions. By the way, Donna's bio is on page 23, Karen's on page 25, and Ann on page 27, okay? All right, with that, Donna.
Are you going to tell the questions you asked?
Okay.
You get to say it.
I have to say it? Okay, all right. So I asked them before we got together to address 3 questions. First of all, a life or leadership challenge that they had to overcome. Secondly, if you had one thing you could do over, what would it be? And the third question was, what is the one piece of advice you wish someone had given you? Okay? So I'll let them address any one or all of those as they would in their introductory comments, and then we'll kind of go from there. Okay? All right. Donna.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm thrilled to be on this panel with Ann and Karen. It's really a pleasure. But I just have to say before I answer Jim's questions that I'm really excited that Jim is here moderating this panel. He was my former professor. Not only was he my professor, but I really give him credit for my whole career because he was actually the guy that got me inspired to go into high tech and IT and all those things, which is something I knew absolutely nothing about until I took his class. And he particularly inspired me when he invited Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston into his classroom, who showed an Apple II running VisiCalc, and that was one of those proverbial change your life moments, and I ran to get a part of that industry because I thought it was going to be something important. So my career is thanks to Jim, so that's why I'm really happy. I think when you slave all those years as a teacher, you should know that there is. Anyway, in terms of Jim's questions, I'll try to answer them each in order if I can remember them. I might have to have him remind me. But the first one had to do with what challenges we had faced. And as I thought about this one, what came to my mind was I came out of high school with a very, very poor education. I was not really prepared for higher education. I'd gone to a very poor kind of inner city high school in the Midwest and had no kind of advanced placement things, had no real depth of academic training. And I went to Yale. I think I got in for, diversity of geography. There's nobody from my town had ever applied in the history of the university. And I think they were curious who this person was. And I got in, and my mother reminds me off the waiting list. Let's not, I've got to have a mom like that. And I was really floundering at first. I had never written a research paper. I had no idea what those little note cards were or a citation was. I got to freshman English. Everybody had read everything that we were going to read there. It was their third or fourth time going through it. I'd never even heard of Beowulf, you know. It was really, really a tough adjustment for me coming from the educational background that I had, and I made it. I got through it, and I grew tremendously out of the experience. One other kid out of my school went to an Ivy Plus school, went to MIT, and he didn't make it past the first semester. So I really believe that that experience is what gave me kind of the personal strength, the character and resilience that got me through lots and lots of ups and downs later in my career, was kind of getting through that first early set of challenges of overcoming a pretty challenging educational background. So let's see, the second thing that you would do over. Yeah. Well, I thought about this one, and the first thing I thought, well, I can't think of anything I'd do over. So I've really had so much good fortune, and many things have happened to me that have been not great, but I don't think I could have done anything differently at the time and when I went through it. But then I did remember one. I remembered one really big one, which was when I was at Handspring. I was CEO. We were a very successful company, handheld computers. We actually were at the time, the fastest growing company in American business history. In our sixth quarter of doing business, we did $120 million of revenue. That is a quarterly number, not an annualized number. I mean, literally in that quarter, $120 million. It was extraordinary growth. It was just a rocket ship. And given the incredible growth, real business, real devices selling, I decided that we were expanding like crazy, and I decided to enter into a lease of a major new complex that was being built in order to house the company, having a very strong recollection of Apple's high growth years being very difficult to manage because of how dispersed we were. So I really wanted us together on one campus. It was near the train, sustainability, all these beautiful things. But it was a substantial debt load for us, and well beyond what we should have undertaken, even with the phenomenal growth we were getting. And I swear the ink was not dry on the lease before the bubble burst, and all of a sudden demand vanished, and the situation changed enormously, and I was saddled with a very, very huge debt. And in the end, I had to get out of it. I had to buy my way out of the lease, and it was a very traumatic experience. And in the end, we had to sell the company to Palm because we were financially weakened. So it was a really big mistake, and if I hadn't made that mistake, I think we might have stayed independent as a company. So that's a real do-over, I would.
And one piece of advice you wish you had done?
One piece of advice I wish I'd gotten is don't sign that lease.
Okay. All right. Karen?
Those are great. Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks all of you for being here. On the issue of challenge, and since I'm really not quite as good at off the cuff, I decided I should write some of the stuff down. I hope you don't mind. I practiced. It's all under 5 minutes. I hate the sound. To sound like a college applicant who tells you that, oh my God, we had a cyclone hit our house and Mom was disabled for years. Dad was in Afghanistan on his third tour of duty, and I was home taking care of the 5 children, because then that girl gets into the college and you think, oh, it's another sob story. But I guess it would be disingenuous if I didn't tell you that a challenge I faced was having 4 children by the time I was 30. Wow. So, that it was just, that's just what happened. And at Fidelity, where I worked, there was not an option if you wanted to become a fund manager to work part-time. I asked, could I take a little more time off, please? They said, we'll make it worth your while. Come back here, you've got to work full time. And I did do that. And I want to thank both Fidelity for giving me the opportunity to do that. And I know I didn't work as hard as some of the guys, but or some of the girls, for sure. But my husband was supported. I had 3 great grandparents at the time who were around, parents, grandparents of the kids. And I had a wonderful support network of help at home. I was just very lucky, and I'm not a good sleeper. That helped. I was very organized, and being organized, determined, and not needing a lot of sleep helped my career, I'll tell you that. Okay, so on the question of what could I do over again, you know, similar to Donna, I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, which I think is actually a pretty good thing. But I do have one that I revisit now and then. I'll tell you about it, and it happened in 2000. At the beginning of 2000, the market was near an all-time high, and I was a fund manager at Fidelity. As I said, I managed a growth fund, and the market was going up every day, and not a little bit. There were days where my top 10 holdings would be up 10%, and it didn't make any sense. And if you think about the names Yahoo, AOL, eBay, Amazon, Excite, At Home, and then the biotech names Amgen and Genentech, you know, it was just crazy, and this is what I owned, and it was great, and there was money pouring into my fund, and I'd say, gee, I should sell these things, and then I'd sell a little bit, and then I'd get more money in. So I wasn't doing a lot of selling. I was doing more buying to just put the money to work. And in March 1st of 2000, I had to rush out of my office because my mother got sent to the emergency room at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Brighton, just down the road, and I was outside the hospital. I talked to my trader, Bob Dirk, and I said, I really should sell my entire portfolio. I should sell everything. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, sell 10 basis points of the top 10 names, which is very, very little. And he did that, and I went into the hospital, and there was no cell phone connection in there. And then the next day my mother died, and then I didn't really do anything with my fund, and then the market collapsed. And you know, the NASDAQ went down 83% from peak to trough, and if I could do that day over, that's what I would do. And the third thing, if we're talking about what advice do I wish somebody had told me, I wish somebody had said, when you're in your 30s, you know, just be a little more proactive. Just ask for what you think you can do, because I had a lot of kids and I was working full time, and you know, I just saw people as I got a little older who were leapfrogging over me and getting bigger positions, both men and women, and I never said a word. I just thought, I'm just going to do my job. I'm just going to show them how good I am. And I heard that people would say, even women would say, she can't be both a good mother and a good fund manager. And I said, well, I'll prove that I'm good at what I'm doing, and I'm going to eventually get the big fund to manage. And I did get the big fund to manage, but it took me a lot longer than it took the other people. And most of them, well, all of the women had children later in, you know, their 30s than I did. And I found when I got the big job, it was actually easier, because when you run a big organization or a big mutual fund, you have lots of people helping you. And when you're one of the helpers, you're just serving a lot of masters, and you have no control over your time. And so I did a lot more travel and worked, I think, many more hours than, I mean, I still worked hard, but when I had the big job, it was a little easier to control. So I wish somebody had said, you know, if you think you do it, just ask. And you know, it was fine in the end. I'm still here. It took years off my life, but whatever.
Great, I tell you. And don't place bets with her on a golf course, I'll just tell you that. Ann?
So I feel bad because I think I'm going to change the tone a little bit from a lot of laughter, which I love, and hopefully we'll come back to laughter. But what I love about being able to participate on a life lessons panel is when you get the questions, you really think about it. Because there's so many experiences within almost 62 years of my life that I've had. And to go back and sort of identify something that really was a challenge. And the biggest one coincidentally happened here. And I still at times get emotional about it, but I had started here at HBS with 2 sons, and I was the only woman in my class who had children. My younger one was not quite a year old, and our older son was 4. And so literally, I think it was the second week of business school. Before we came, my younger son had been having some bleeding problems. And, you know, we just thought it was where he had cut his lip, and, you know, it was just a difficult place for the bleeding to stop. And so literally, after, I don't know, a couple of days, we saw he was limping because he was just learning to walk and his knee was swollen. And my husband takes him to the hospital because I have to come to class. and I get a call, or I called him. We didn't have cell phones. I called on the payphone from Baker Library, and I said, how's it going? And he said, so far so good. And so I drive to the hospital after class, and there's a doctor in there, and my baby's all on these wires and things, and he's an intern, obviously, because he just blurts out, he's going to be okay, he has hemophilia. And what do you say? You don't say anything, you just sort of melt, you die, you don't know what to say. And so I go home after, being with them, and we called the doctor, and my husband knew. He was waiting to tell me when I got home. And it was one of those moments where you're in the pressure cooker of your first week at HBS, and you get this. And so it was, to say one of those life moments, huge life moment, but here's the good news. The next day I didn't go to class, we went to the doctor. And we had a fabulous doctor who basically said, because I said, I've just started business school, I don't know what to do, I really want to go to business school, but, my son's situation, what does it all mean? And so the doctor, I wish I could remember his name, because to this day, he just said, Mrs. Fudge, I want you to go on with your life. The worst thing you can do is stop doing what you're doing and make him an emotional cripple. He will have physical things that he can't do, but you need to go on and treat him exactly as you do your older son. And so I looked at him and we went home, and we just sort of, you call your mom, you cry, you do all these things. And so after a day or two, I said, okay, I've got to go back to business school. I've got to go back to class. I've missed 2 days of class. And like I said, you know what the first 2 weeks are like. And so I remember by then I had a couple of classes, and I say this because I love this professor. He's since passed, Harry Hansen. And Harry was our marketing professor, and he was in many respects a curmudgeon, to say the least, how he started his classes. But there was a connection there, and maybe because I like marketing, that might have been part of it. But there was a connection that I felt I could go and talk to him and tell him what was going on and why I had missed classes. And, you'd never think about this at Harvard Business School, but I go in, and, I could barely get it out, and he says, okay, what can I do to help? And I said, well, I can't go in and meet all my professors and say this. It's difficult. He says, done. I will take care of that. And he said, what about doctors? What about healthcare? He just sort of went from the business school to me as a person. And I have to tell you, it just totally shaped my life, my commitment to this degree, my commitment to being successful or pursuing what was important to me, and yet doing what I needed to for my son. And our both sons, because honestly, it's a family thing when you have a kid who has a lifelong disability. And to say that it shaped my life fundamentally is an understatement. And I say, like a lot of people who deal with children who have illness, you either rise to it and deal with it, right? And it really brings a strength. It really demonstrated a strength to me that I really didn't know I possessed. And then to be able to have that and then go back to class. And of course, it's not something you tell your classmates. In fact, some of my section mates here probably to this day don't know it, and I was thinking hard about whether I'd even say it publicly in this venue, but I think it's important to say it. I think it's important to share with people that sometimes what the world sees as your obvious success comes with so many other things going on in your life, and we shouldn't be afraid to share that, because honestly, it benefits a lot of people to know that. And so that's why I'm sharing it today after, so many years. I graduated in '77. But a story that I think is particularly important, and honestly one that it was interesting for the whole 2 years, because believe it or not, and I do believe in miracles, the rest of my 2 years here, he never had an incident. Now he was bruised, he looked like an abused kid, but he never had a serious incident that required, hospitalization after that one time. When we moved and he started playing in the playground, that's another story. I won't go into all those years of my rough and tumble kid, but today he's a 6'5" dad, and he's got 2 sons, and he lives in Arlington, and he's doing not-for-profit work here, and I'm very proud of him. And you know, we just find our inner strength. So that was one, and just to take you through the process of deciding to stay, deciding to continue with my education here and getting through it and realizing that I could get through it and we could make it work. And you know, I had fantastic parents who came up and supported me, and neighbors. We lived in Westboro because that was the only place we could afford to live, and I commuted from Westboro, Mass into the business school every day. But even little things like I got to know the toll driver, the toll booth guy, and I would go through his toll booth and he'd always ask me how am I doing, because you know I said I'm going to school, and we got to know each other, and I would see him in the morning and he'd get me pumped up for class, and then I'd see the other guy when I came back, and you know, how was your day? And so you have a community that comes to your aid, and I really believe that. On the do-overs, I thought a lot about that too, and I struggle with that, and Jim knows my husband, and this morning I said, you know, Jim asked us 3 questions, and the do-over one has me stumped because I don't have a do-over. And I said, should I just make one up? Because I know it sounds so bad not to have a do-over. But here's the thing about life experience, and why I wouldn't do it over, is because it's all valuable. So the stuff that happens, and not that I'm sure you feel the same way, like you really wouldn't want it to change, because fundamentally you had to have that happen for all the other things to happen in your life. And those are things, honestly, that age allows you to appreciate, whereas before, like if I was younger, I'd probably give you a list of all the things, but now I appreciate the bumps, and trust me, I've had many bumps along the way. And then the last one, I'm gonna flip it a little bit, because you asked what do I wish someone shared with me. I'm happy to say, and I thought about it a lot after listening to the presentation of the survey, the best advice I got was when I totally didn't get it, and I was about to go off to college, and I was sitting at the table with my mom. I was 18, and she said, I just want you to remember one thing before you leave. Family is most important. And it wasn't one of those, and I have no idea why at that moment she said that to me or what, and you know, 18, I'm giddy about getting away from home, and you know, so it went in, you know, and it was there and floating around, but it always came back and it was there. And I mention that to say this, I don't think making a choice about family, or I never saw my family as a barrier. Family is the bedrock root of who I am. And the commitment to family, I mean, it was funny because in many respects I became even more committed to sort of doing well because I knew we would probably have extraordinary expenses with my son. It's fascinating how the mind works. And so I wanted to do well to make sure there were no challenges in raising my son. And to do well, but no grandiose plan of CEO or anything. That's not really why I came here. Coming here was another way to sort of expand my horizons and the possibility and to stretch myself intellectually and to meet people who are different from my usual experience. So that was the best advice about family, and it served me well throughout my life.
Great story. Huh? Okay, so again, I want this to be very interactive. You don't want me asking questions, I guarantee you, this group. I want to hear what's on your mind, what you'd like to hear from these ladies, and who've had such distinguished careers. We have microphones, so if you'll raise your hand, we'll get a microphone over to you, and we can get the Q&A segment started. Here's right in the middle here.
I'd be interested to hear what each of the panels think of Kind of playing off of what Ann said, but also at the end of Robin's speech, I was taken by what she said about, instead of saying that one of the barriers to women doing well in business is family, is to take that off the table and say that all of us, men and women, have to think about that life-work balance. But, and she posed the question, let's not think about it that way, let's think about that as a given, and now think about how we can structure workplaces to better mine the capital, the intellectual capital that exists, whether it's men or women who want to have a more balanced way. Do you see that there's paths forwards, and in your companies, have you had the experience where you've been able to make that work?
Okay, let's start with Karen, and then we'll rotate.
So, so the question that I think you're asking is, do I think that we can create work environments where having children, or the parenting of them, is no longer a barrier to your advancement or career? And I think about this topic a lot. I've thought about it a lot in my life. And I know that I am a person who, using Sheryl Sandberg's book, has done a lot of leaning in. You know, I'm an example of a big lean-in type. Do I think that's an appropriate strategy for everybody? Do I think that everybody should have worked as hard as I worked with 4 little kids for many, many years to get ahead at Fidelity or Goldman Sachs or Procter & Gamble or Kraft? I don't actually think it's a strategy for everybody if I follow my playbook. So if you don't follow the work really hard, and my friends, I say to my friends, how do you think you did it? And they all say things like, well, I just killed myself. You know, that's the response. They just worked harder than anybody around them if they had 2, 3, 4 kids and wanted to keep getting ahead. So what Robin is saying, and I agree with what she says, I'm just not sure that I can agree with the solution, not that she gave one, is that companies have to change, enterprises have to change, maybe public policy has to change so that it is no longer a disadvantage to have the distraction. And I'm calling it any kind of distraction. If you were a marathon runner and really serious and have a job, and you are leaving every day for 2 hours in the middle of the day or 4:30 every single day to go run 15 miles, that's a distraction. You're not working as hard as other people. And unless your company is getting a benefit from your running, it's the same as if you're leaving to relieve the babysitter or pick somebody up at childcare. And I would like to be able to find a way to create this sort of equal environment for genders, for anybody who has distractions, and we're calling it parenting as the distraction here.
Okay, so I have to jump into this one real quick. So I was the person who left General Mills every day at 4:30 and 5 o'clock to pick my kid up because I had to. And my husband worked on the other side of town. I was the closest, and that was the dynamic. Now, with 20 MBAs coming in to be a marketing assistant at General Mills, it was definitely viewed differently. However, part of my job, and this is where I think coming in with a different mindset was helpful to the organization, was to say, I will do the job as well as my counterparts. I will use my time differently. I will have a lot of things. I will get my kids early. I will get dinner. They will go to bed. I will work. If I think about time used in the office versus time wasted in the office, very, very different to have. So I think we as business leaders have to help change that dynamic. I had to educate my boss. My boss said to me, how did I think I could do my job with 2 children and leaving at 5 o'clock? And I said, let's talk about it in my evaluation. And if there are problems, if I'm not delivering, then that's a conversation we should have. Now, I got a lot of strength just having that. That was my lean-in moment. But it's about getting the work done. It really is. And it's about how you do it and how you educate. And the studies need to be taken on how much time at work is working. And I think we would all learn a bit from that kind of understanding so that we help educate And it didn't slow down my advancement at General Mills. I did very well. People knew they could count on me, but they knew that I wasn't going to go for drinks after, or I wasn't going to stay at work late, because I had to go home and I wanted to. It was not a had. I could have probably developed a different work model, but that was the work model that I chose. It was why I chose to go to Minneapolis instead of going to New York to work, because I knew the odds of that kind of family dynamic working in a New York City or a Boston Fidelity might be a little more difficult to navigate, but those are all decisions that you make in the process of the kind of job you take, where you're going to try to impact and make a difference.
Donna?
Yeah, I think it's great that we have such a representation. We have kind of finance, marketing, and then Silicon Valley high tech. And I think the environments are extremely different. And I know if my experience on Wall Street would have been very different than the experience I ended up with in Silicon Valley. But I would say I think Silicon Valley has been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of the flexibility of lifestyle and working and being very focused on results, not on hours in the building. And not that people don't work hard, they work extremely hard, but I do find that there's such a thirst for talent. We've had such growth and we have a shortage of talent. So when you have a shortage of talent, then that's when you're more flexible, right? You say, okay, if you gotta leave at 4, you gotta leave, but we need you, so we'll accept that. And I kind of think that's been the atmosphere. I mean, we have a VP engineering, happens to be a man, VP engineering at the company I'm the board chair now, and he teaches in his kids' school every Wednesday afternoon, and everybody knows he's not there Wednesday afternoon because he's got this commitment in his kids' school, and it's perfectly accepted. You don't schedule meetings you need him at on Wednesday afternoon, but you also see him doing check-ins and evaluating stuff at 11 o'clock at night sometimes, so the work gets done. My own personal situation might be interesting because it's a little different than these guys, which is that I was single, was not lucky enough to find a life mate until a little later in life, but decided that I wanted to have a family anyway, and so I ended up adopting my daughter. So she was 3.5 in a Russian orphanage, and I went and adopted her and brought her home and raised her as a single mother until I subsequently met my husband and got married. And I was a CEO when I was a single mom, and it was definitely challenging. Took having a lot of staff, so a good support team. I felt like I should have staff meetings at home in addition to at work. And between the personal assistant who paid my bills, and the gardener, and the nanny, and the this one and the that one. It really did, you really find a support community for stuff like that. I mean, it was just amazing to me the people I could reach out to who would become a part of my community, from my brother who lived locally, who became kind of a stand-in for every Father's Day and Dad thing where I needed somebody, to neighbors who looked out for the place. So you really can build a community. And I had worked like a madwoman for my first 10 years. I mean, 24-hour kind of work for 10 years. And I said, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go home and have dinner with this kid. And I did. I left. I went home. I had dinner with the kid. After I got her in bed, I got on that computer and I worked for hours. But, I got home and had dinner with her. And I said, and I'm also not going to be out more than 2 nights a week. And I will let myself be out for dinner 2 nights a week for various business functions, and that was it. And when the third request came up, I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm booked, I can't do it. And I did just fine. So I think it really is, you have to kind of define your space, but you have to be in a place that's possible. And I think in Silicon Valley and high tech, it was more possible maybe than in other places.
Interesting. Okay, let's take one from this side of the room first.
Hi, I wanted to pick up on a theme that Ann, you mentioned, and by the way, thank you so much for sharing that incredibly personal story. It's extraordinarily generous of you. But I'm curious how the other panelists feel about this too. You talked about how you were getting your job done, so at the end of the day, it didn't matter if you left at 4:30 or 5 to pick up your child. And I feel like there's been a lot of discussion about how women don't realize the importance of networking and going to that cocktail hour. And they, are a little bit too focused on just getting the job. So I'm curious about how the three of you think about that in terms of whether it helped or hurt your career.
So let me add a point here, because I think it's a very important one. I absolutely knew the importance of networking, but I did it on my own terms. So what we used to do was have like this big cookout at the Fudges. We'd have in the summer cookout and we'd have the Christmas open house. And I'd invite all my colleagues to come, and it became a way that I could do it on my terms in my home with my family, and it just brought a whole different dimension to relationships where people weren't all about like just being over at a bar. And honestly, like the one year where I was like, oh, we may not do it, and the guys were like, what do you mean you're not gonna do it, you know? So that there are ways, and that's the creativity. So it is absolutely important. That social network community with the people you work with is very important, but you can create it on your terms.
Donna, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is really important to build relationships with people. I think one of my funniest stories was, I don't think I was very attentive to this in the first 10 years. I was just a bulldog. I mean, I just was like, you know, crazed. And when I met my business partner, Jeff Hawkins, and I wanted the job as CEO of Palm, I was really excited. I really wanted it. And I gave him this long list of references. You can check me out with anybody and so on. And turns out his wife had worked at Apple. And she didn't know me, I didn't know her, but he said, well, why don't you see if you can find out something about this Donna Dubinsky? And she's like, walks down the hall at Apple, sees somebody, says to her, hey, do you know Donna Dubinsky? And this person says, oh yeah, she's pretty good. She goes back and she tells that to Jeff. And I'm like, oh my God, she could have run into anybody. Oh my God. I think of all the people that wouldn't have said that, you know. It was like, you know, how terrifying. And it really taught me this lesson, really in the moment, that was, boy, you want to have a good professional relationship with everybody. You know, whether they were a close colleague, whether they're on the other side of the negotiating table, whether they were ever, no matter if you were winning and they were losing, whatever, you want them to walk away with the notion, you know what? She was smart, she was fair, she was fun, she was, you know, a good person to deal with, because you never know when they're going to stop somebody in the hall and ask them that. So I think, you know, I really did kind of make a point after that of saying, you know, it could even be just little things, you know, starting a meeting out, asking somebody how their day was, or knowing that their kid had just applied to college, or, you know, you can do it in little snippets and moments. It doesn't have to be at the bar at night, too, to show somebody you care about who they are as a person, you want to get to know them, you appreciate the opportunity to build a relationship.
Karen, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I never went out for drinks with the guys or the brokers after work. You know, I just didn't. I went home. I didn't leave the office at 5, but I left the office at 6, and then we had 2 boys who played hockey and one who was in plays and a daughter who swam right over at the Logic pool here. So we were always sort of in different directions. We'd meet at home, and so dinner was kind of late. But what I did do, and what I still do now, is I tried to get to know the people who would be working with me, the people who were the brokers who would call on us, the analysts on Wall Street, so that I'd know something about them or their family, or I'd say, well, if you're in Boston, you know, come out to the house, sort of thing that Ann was talking about. I still know, I would say, the majority of the people who have worked in finance in Boston for, you know, 15 or more years. I just know a lot of people, and I'm friendly, and I wanted to find out who they were. So it was my way of networking that was different from what the guys did, but I think it works.
You know, it's really interesting. That question relates to, again, some of the data that Robin had pulled together, and the biggest gap between men and women in terms of their perception was around this issue of exclusion from informal networks. So it's really a interesting question, and
yeah, I just want to throw in one more thought on it. I really hate the thing around drinking, you know. I just think it's so perverse. And I know in one of my companies, my boss was one of these guys who was out at the bars with the guys at night having these discussions, and, you know, he'd come in, particularly at an offsite, you know, we'd have a management offsite, and he'd start the next morning every time, well, you know, when I was at the bar, you know, Joe said this, and George said that, and da-da-da-da-da. Finally, I pulled him aside, and I just said, you know what? You got to stop, you know, making the bar thing the center of your message, because the message you're sending out is that you got to be at the bar if you want to be a player here. And I don't think you should be doing that. And you know what? He stopped. He'd never realized it before. It was just kind of part of who he was. And I just raised it to his attention, and he stopped.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to this section. Let's find someone over here. Here's one all the way down front.
Yeah, I was also very interested in I was interested in the presentation earlier today when they talked about part-time employment. And my sister was fortunate enough to, when she had her children, work for the IBM Corporation that was really in the leading edge of establishing a part-time professional path. But I don't hear a lot of that. And now that we are women CEOs, some of us who worked horrendous hours and gave up a lot of the first steps and the school plays to be there, the hours that were required, I look back and say I wish there had been more part-time options at a challenging intellectual level that led to a management role in the long term. So I just wanted to kind of run that by you and see what you're seeing in your companies and stimulate some conversation about how to better and perhaps a part-time way accommodate families who have high potential parents.
Okay, Ann, you want to?
I just know it varies from company to company. I can talk really, since I don't have a company as a retiree, but the companies whose boards I'm on, there are options to do part-time, but it depends on the job you're in. It really, really does. There's some that just don't, as much as you might want to, it can't be done. So part of it is us as women making decisions about what we want to do and how we want to do it, as well as companies. A Unilever, for example, does do job sharing and things in certain jobs that they know it can work, which allows people to do part-time. And so they work through that for men and women, and it's working well. But it's very clear which jobs you can do it in and which you can't.
Donna, Karen?
Yeah, I think it's much harder on a management job than an individual contributor job, and I think the problem is if you're only there part-time and you have people who work for you and they need you and they need access to you, it can really make the organization kind of, resentful and frustrated if you're not there. But I think in Silicon Valley, and certainly in my companies, we have created a lot of part-time opportunities, and again, it's all about the talent. I mean, one of our most talented engineers wanted to leave. It happened to be a man, could have been a woman though, and we said, hey, how about go to 4 days a week, go to 80% time, and that'll help take some pressure off these other things you wanted to do. And he sort of went, oh, that's a good idea, and he was very successful at 4 days a week for several years until he got back to the point where he wanted to go back to 5. I would do that for people in a minute. But it's still, being a coder, it's much easier than it is to be a manager. And I think that's where it gets tough to be part-time.
Okay, okay.
I would just say that in finance, when you're managing money in the stock market, it's harder, I think, to do that part-time. There were administrative jobs at Fidelity, marketing jobs that were part-time, and women who decided that they'd like to sort of take a little bit less of a sort of hard pressure role would take those jobs. I've offered 2 people part-time work at our company, both of whom had family situations, and one did it for years that it seemed to work pretty well. The other one decided just to keep working full-time, but I think it would be great. I mean, I'd love to sort of try it out and see how it works more often.
Okay, let's go back to the center here. It's a question. Why don't you wait for the mic so we can hear you? Yeah, great.
So earlier in my career, I was blissfully ignorant, and I thought everybody kind of took this straight path up to the top, right? And now we all know that that's not true, and it's really more of kind of a zigzag. And you're presented with these opportunities and these decisions you have to make that oftentimes are very pivotal in helping you get to where the 3 of you have gotten. I would be very eager to hear about 1 or 2 of those pivotal moments or decisions that you had to make that you think were instrumental in helping you get to where you are.
Great. Karen, you want to start that?
Yeah. So in terms of pivotal decisions that I felt I had to make at a certain time, when I was in my late 40s and I was managing a big fund at Fidelity, and I saw nothing, there was no other job that I wanted. That I liked my job. I'd been doing it for 8 years. I thought I can do it for 5 more years, not 10 more years, because there's an awful lot of pressure to do that, and most people sort of, you don't want to use the word burnout, but they evolve into something that's more management or less high pressure. And I decided I really think that I want to start another business or do something that's entrepreneurial. Then I had to decide, well, what's that going to look like? And I didn't want to walk out of Fidelity and start a company myself. I wanted to have a partner to do it with. I found the partner to do it with, and then one of our kids got sick. So I have a son who had cancer, and he was really sick, and he's okay now. But seeing how a very big company handled that, so what it was like to be an employee of a company where some people would look at me, some people I could tell they would avoid having to run into me because they didn't want to say, how's Will doing? You know, they just didn't want to ask. I thought to myself, I'm never going to treat anybody like that. Again, I'm going to make sure that if I'm in a small company, if anything happens to anybody or their family, we're nurturing, we understand, we give them what they need. I mean, not that Fidelity didn't give me what I needed, but it sort of cemented it all. I knew at that point I was going to create a company. I'd find partners to do it with. You know, and I love Fidelity, love, love, love. We use them for back office security on everything, custody, training. But I wanted to do something different, and those things together was like, okay, now I'm really going to do it.
Donna?
Well, let's see. I worked for 10 years at Apple and Claris, Apple's software subsidiary, and we were supposed to create a separate company out of Claris, and then they decided to repurchase it, and I was ready to leave Apple, so I decided I was going to leave. And I decided to take some time off and figure out what I wanted to do. So I took a year off and went to Paris. So Claris to Paris, see, it made sense? And the guys bought themselves like Maseratis, and I went to Paris. And I bought myself a year in Paris. And I had a wonderful year, but I really tried to be thoughtful about what did I learn, what was I good at, what was I not good at. You know, really knew at this point pretty much what I could do and what I couldn't do. And I came back deciding for myself, okay, I think I can be a CEO. And I think that what I'm good at is stuff that a CEO has to do, specifically management and operational things and strategy and all that stuff. But what I'm not good at is markets and products and technology and understanding the intersection of those things and what the world was going to need next. And so really I need to find myself somebody who does that, who's looking for a business partner. So I went through quite a very clarifying analysis of who I was, what I felt I could do, and what I needed to find in order to enable that. And I came back with that as my mission, to find that person and that opportunity. And with that clarity, I ended up finding it. But I'll tell you one other funny piece of it was the first thing I did when I got back is I went to see my former boss, Bill Campbell, who's a well-known mentor in Silicon Valley. And I went to Bill and I said, you know, I think I'm ready to be a CEO. I'd like to go ahead and be a CEO. What do you think? Because I knew anybody who was going to hire me as a CEO in Silicon Valley, the first call I was going to make was to Bill Campbell. So I had to know what Bill was going to say. Because if Bill was going to say, no, she's not ready or she's not CEO material, then the chances of me actually becoming a CEO were going to be pretty small. I knew one person, it was kind of like Gladiator, you know, thumbs up. And I knew one guy could make this difference to me, and when he said, yes, I'll support that, I think you'd be a great CEO, was when then I said, okay, I had kind of permission, I could embark on my search, because I know that first reference call was going to be a positive one. So, and then I met the guy who became my partner, Jeff Hawkins, who was the product guy looking for kind of an operational partner, and we're in our third company together, so it's worked out.
Yeah?
I'm not sure. It's so much fun hearing you guys' stories. So I'm going to step back a little bit earlier in my career. I was president of Maxwell's Coffee. I had been doing that for a couple of years, and it was a real turnaround. And I felt, you know, we'd gotten there, and I really wanted another year to do it. Not many people, it's like sometimes you get the call for the next job and you're ready to go. And so my boss said, I want you to go to Chicago and run the cheese business. And that was like really the prelude to the next big job. And I said, can I think about it? Because and he looked at me like, what do you mean you want to think about it? Everybody wants this job. And I said, I want to think about it. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to move to Chicago, boys in high school. There's a whole lot of things going on. And I really felt we were so on the cusp of sort of that third year of running Maxwell House. And I say that to say this. I stayed in the job, and sometimes it's as important to say no to a potential job opportunity as it is to say yes. And secondly, to their credit, I stayed there. They wanted to give me more, and so I ended up running Maxwell's Coffee and Post Cereals, and they combined 2 divisions to give me more stuff to do. And so that was an example of, back then, like really responsive. They didn't have to do that, and for me not to sort of be a death sentence because I said no to making the move.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, question here.
Thanks, first of all, much gratitude to all of you for being so open and honest. I wish more folk would take the truth serum so that we can hear the way it really is. My question has to do with the impact on our children of our choices. I remember when my daughter was 18, excuse me, and getting ready to graduate from high school, I made the mistake of asking her, I was getting sentimental because she was getting ready to go off, what kind of mom did she think I had been?
Bad idea.
And you know, and she says, well, you know, Mom, I think you've been a good mom, yada, 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 but I wish you had been home more. And at that, when she said that, I felt like somebody had pierced my heart. And I got very defensive and started saying, well, you know, you're a teenager, you don't ever want to spend any time with me, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to be seen with me in the mall, blah, 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 blah. She said, yeah, but I just wish you had been home, you know, and I would know that you were there when I did come home. So anyway, later in life, all of my children have essentially said, you know, that the impact of your being a happy and fulfilled woman probably had more of an impact on all this other stuff. But that whole dealing with the little guilt thing, I just wanted to know how you all have dealt with it.
I like to tell people that at any time, if you ask my 4 children, 75% of them will say that they're happy with the choices that I've made. It's not the same 75%, but, and then if I were home all the time, I have a feeling if you ask them how they felt about it, you'd only get 25% saying that they were happy. Now, I know that's not really true, I'm joking, but I'll tell you a brief story and something that I wrote about in the Boston Globe years ago. I was on a plane going to California when I just found out I was having my 2nd set of twins. Okay, so now you know. And everyone in my family is twins. I had 2-year-old twins. I was pregnant. The ultrasound showed 1 child. Great. We're going to have 3. Really great. And then I had an abnormal blood test. I had to go to the hospital. They do another ultrasound. I saw the 2nd one. I said, oh my God. And the woman said, what? And I said, there's 2. And she says, oh, that's so wonderful. You have twins. I said, it's not wonderful. I know what this is like. So the next day, so I was 5.5 months pregnant. The next day, I had to go on a trip to California. And I was on a plane that stopped in Chicago and then went to LA. And stopped in Chicago, and some people got on, and a woman got on, and she sat, I'm sitting window, space, she sits in the seat, and as she's coming toward me, I recognize her, but I don't know, I know I've seen her picture. She sits down, she's very well dressed, nice sort of flip hairdo. She sits down next to me, she pulls out of her briefcase a big envelope, and it's full of letters, and I go, it's Ann Landers. And I said, but that's not her real name. What's her name? What's her name? And somehow I came up with her name. I said, excuse me, are you Mrs. Lederer? How did I come up with that? Are you Mrs. Lederer? She says, yes, I am. And I said, would you please talk to me because I have a And so she said, patting the seat between, sit right here, dear, and we'll talk about it. And then she talked to me for 4 hours, and here's what she said. I was a twin, right? Dear Abby, dear Abby. I was a twin. My mother had other children. She resented us from the second that we were born. She was home, and she thought we made her life miserable, and we didn't let her do anything out of the house. She said, you got to go to work. You got to work. She said, you're the type.
story.
She said, make sure everybody's happy. If your kids need you, you have to be there, but try to make sure that you're happy, and then they'll all be happy.
Wow, wow. So I'm going to, there have been some very patient people in the back here. I want to make sure we try and get at least one or two more questions in. The young woman back there has given up on me, I guess.
This lady has been asking.
Okay, let's go here.
We've talked a lot about early and mid-career. What do you think it takes to sustain passion and excitement as you get to this expanded late career we all are looking at in our 50s and 60s and maybe into our 70s?
I would love to answer that,
Yeah,
because I'm
please.
probably the elder
Please.
one here. I am
Oh, I'm the youngest.
I am the elder, oh my goodness. Anyway, I just have to say, don't be afraid of it. It is the best time of life. And I say to people now that I think all of my training, including my work career, led me to be able to do the fantastic things that I'm doing now. When I went through the survey, the one thing that I thought about was I've not given back as much as I want. And I feel that I'm really now at that giving back to make a difference phase, which is really what we're all about. And that the career helped me to get all the stuff and line it all up so that I could do that. So I really am more conscious now of creating a portfolio of activities that satisfies a really broad area of interest, from education to public policy to being engaged in business. So not-for-profit boards, for-profit boards, and being able to do it on a global basis. And my last job taught me that, because most of my career at General Mills, General Foods and Craft, was really U.S. domestic, North America. My last job running Young and Rubicam brands, we had offices in 80 countries around the world, and I really realized how much I enjoyed the global nature of my work. And so most of the boards and the things that I'm engaged with now are all very global in nature, and I just find it, you know, the best time is ahead.
Okay, great. Anything from either one, or we just, one last question here. Here, we got one all the way down front here.
Just briefly, you talked about networking events, and y'all, there was a little repartee, I forget. Anyway, but the bottom line, my question is golf as a networking.
Oh, no.
There was a golf joke.
No.
Do you need to play golf?
No, absolutely not.
I don't play golf.
I mean,
Do you play, Donna?
I don't play golf.
I don't
I never did any organized sports whatsoever. I hike. I like to hike.
I like to hike.
But I actually think, I would say to you, I believe that women of my generation were not well served by not having sports as a part of their upbringing, and that younger women who have been involved in particularly team sports, I think, learn an awful lot about competition, winning, losing, players having different roles on a team, the whole need to pull together. I felt like that was a real deficit in my education. Not so much golf and networking on the golf course, but much more that I do think that Title IX and the opportunity for young women coming through college of playing in sports has been very beneficial to growing them as really, you know, competitors in the business world.
Yeah, I played 2 college sports, and I played a lot of sports with people in business. And do I think it has helped business? Do I think that I get a lot of business done because I've played golf or tennis or squash with? No, I would say no. Do I feel that I have closer relationships? Perhaps. You know, better? Yes, probably. But I don't think it's necessary. And I don't take very much. I'm always saying, oh, I'm going to leave 1 day a week at 4 and go play 9 holes. I never do that.
Okay, look, we've come to a point where I'm going to have to end this. Thank you.